Earlier this week in the email I sent out on Monday, I included the well-known Serenity Prayer, and I'll repeat it here. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Wisdom. We talk about wisdom often. We also frequently talk about discernment, suggesting that perhaps it's a more useful phrase than getting caught up in judgment, being judgmental, and judging. By discernment, we're referring to our capacity to sift apart, to differentiate. In this case, know the difference between what can and cannot be changed. And discernment is one of those ingredients that's called for living a human life, for being able to know the difference between what can be controlled and what is less controllable. And when we think about this issue of controlling, we begin to realize that it's closely related to our inclination to take things personally. And as we've talked about in the recent past, our inclination to take things personally often arises from the vulnerabilities we feel that are captured in one or more of the four conditions of being human that are beyond our control. So when we're feeling vulnerable, we're inclined to take things personally. And that's when we get caught up in trying to control the fundamentally uncontrollable. We feel as if there's a big threat to our identity, to our sense of self. And so we get caught up in grasping or aversion, trying to get control of things that really aren't controllable. And there are some practices, some behaviors that we can engage in that will help with discernment, with being able to know the difference between what's controllable and what's not controllable. And these practices are about direct experience of what's impermanent and imperfect in our lives. When we are actively and attentively observing what's happening in our lives moment by moment, we see that there's this complex constellation of energies and activities in the mind that keeps changing, keeps shifting, causes and conditions that are themselves impermanent, keep affecting each other differently. And so when we meditate, or when we just step back in life and take a look at what is going on, observe our thoughts, our emotions, our physical sensations, we see how they keep changing in ways that are not so much an issue of control, but lead us to an insight, an understanding of how things are, of how life is. It puts us in a place of realization of the realities of life. When we're in this place of observing impermanence and imperfection, we can begin experimenting and see how we can, which of those things that's occurring are in fact within our control, and which are beyond our control, and which then we can change our relationship to. We always have choices. And by being in the observer role, we're creating enough space to be able to make those choices, to be able to be discerning. And in mindfulness, when we talk about the two wings of the bird as being wisdom and compassion, this is what we mean by wisdom, this discernment, this ability through direct experience to have realization of how things are. And of course, all of that arises from, or is maybe even the ground for, the reality that life is hard, and we're inclined to make it harder. When we get caught up in trying to control the uncontrollable, we make life harder. The fact that we are dealing with events in our lives that are uncontrollable ought to be sufficiently painful. But we can't stop there. By trying to gain control of it, we make it even harder. So let's do a little practice around all of this. So beginning with a couple of deep breaths, followed by those long, slow out breaths that let go of all of this cognitive processing we've been up to, letting go of the energy that is generated by cognitive processing, and allowing ourselves to settle in, allowing our attention to come into this moment. Feeling the tension flowing out on the out-breath. And turning our attention to our breathing. Noticing that we can realize the act of breathing through the air that's flowing in and out of the nostrils, or the rising and falling of the chest, or the expanding and contracting of the abdomen. Choosing one of those three ways that our breathing shows up to focus our attention on. Feeling the breathing process even throughout our entire bodies. And as we are breathing in, knowing that we are breathing in. As we are breathing out, knowing that we are breathing out. Being an observer of our breathing. Being aware of the experience of breathing while also experiencing the breathing. And also noticing the arising of any thoughts or emotions. The mind and the psyche are always busy generating thoughts and emotions. Noticing them. Knowing when a thought is arising, that a thought is arising. Letting each thought or emotion come, letting each thought or emotion be, and letting go of a thought or emotion when the time has come. And as thoughts and emotions are present, noticing any reactions you're having to the presence of that thought or emotion. Is there any resistance? Noticing if there's any wishing that this thought or emotion would go away or replaced by something else. Noticing, and then noticing, and noticing a bit more. In this noticing, in this observing, you are having the direct experience of how thoughts and emotions are not permanent, how they come and go, how they keep changing. You're also having the direct experience of noticing how some of the thoughts or emotions are appealing, and some are very unappealing. Life is not perfect. This is your direct experience. No need to analyze. Just rest with it, be with it, allowing it. being discerning about your relationship to whatever is arising. Welcoming, resisting, wishing it to be other than it is. Appreciating that with this spaciousness, we can begin to change our relationship to whatever is arising. From trying to control it or allow it, to instead simply be with it, fully allowing and accepting. After all, whatever is present has already happened. And in closing, offering yourself a few words of kindness for your willingness to stay with this practice.